question I have for you this morning, church, is what would happen if every Christian believer in your community made an attempt to build relationships with the people in the 8 households closest to them? Think about that question. That's literal. 8 literal households closest to them. This month's theme is the art of neighboring. I hope to tell you and then show you how you can reach your neighbors for Christ. If you were here last Sunday night, you would have heard our Kingdom Builders presentation, and we are developing a 3-pronged approach to community outreach here at New Life Baptist Church. And one of those prongs is neighboring. This is not a gimmick or a program. This is a process that will help our church be better neighbors to the people that are around us, to be Christian neighbors, to help us to understand our neighbors' needs and to be able to meet them. Speaking of neighborhoods, the definition of neighborhood certainly does change depending on the context, doesn't it? The 8 closest neighbors around here, well, you might actually get lost going to, if you decide to walk to your neighbor's property. I mean, that's just the way it is in this immediate area. That is a lot different than the neighborhood I grew up in. There were literal, houses that 9 square block that you see with the different squares around it. And if you're in the middle, yeah, I could draw a square around that and have 8 houses within walking distance. It would be enough to give Wesley the EBGBs, I think. There are just so many people in our neighborhood. In fact, we had so many kids in that neighborhood. If you go 3 or 4 blocks in one way or the other, you would have enough boys my age that could fill up 2 baseball teams. In fact, that's what we did oftentimes, especially during the summer. We would go up to the local high school and we would play baseball on their field with just the kids from our neighborhood. Have you ever seen the movie The Sandlot? That was a movie I grew up in, that I grew up watching, and that was our neighborhood. Our neighborhood was a lot like The Sandlot. Or maybe you got to go back a little bit further and remember Leave It to Beaver. Okay, imagine Leave It to Beaver. That's what The Sandlot is like, except you got to add a really large scary dog and some chewing tobacco. But it was basically the same thing. You grow up in this kind of environment where there's houses everywhere, there's young families everywhere, and you got to make all your friends, they got to be neighborhood friends. So I loved growing up in that neighborhood, Arbel Drive, Townsend and Arbel. And even though we lived other places around that time, we lived there the longest. We lived there for 10 years, and that was where most of my fondest memories growing up took place. And when I think about that neighborhood, I can think of it with, nostalgia goggles on. You know what I'm talking about? Like if you think about where you grew up in, the good old days, right? We always talk about the good old days and how the good old days are not here anymore. I think we had somebody say that just earlier today. And we can look at that time period, what we think of as that time where we grew up in a neighborhood, as being the good old days, the golden days, but we're doing it with nostalgia goggles on. Because if we take the goggles off, we can remember and go, oh yeah, it wasn't always great all the time. I remember some of my friends like Judson Baldwin. Judson lived across the street from us, and his house was the only house that had security bars on all the windows and doors. And he always kept the doors locked, deadbolt locked, and it was key only on both sides. I mean, it was serious security. And he had an alarm and everything. And even when people were over there, if his house was filled with family and friends, they'd have those doors locked. And when I was a kid, I used to get really annoyed with that. And sometimes it was a real inconvenience. I remember one time, I'm not making this up. We were sitting there, just the friends. It was his mom and dad weren't around. And it was just us in the house. And of course the doors were locked, so he literally had to unlock the door with the key around his neck to let us out. And he's like, hey, I don't remember what we were talking about, but he's like, hey, just wait there, just sit there, I got to show y'all something. He goes back into his dad's closet in his bedroom and comes out with a 9mm Uzi, a real 9mm Uzi with extended clip and folded stock. And we were like, what are you doing? Put that back. And, hey, safety's on. I don't have my finger on the trigger. It's okay. Of course, he was pointing it at us, so it wasn't okay. And Gene, where's Gene? You would know that's one of the rules, right, of gun safety. You don't point it at something you don't intend to shoot, right? And what did we do? We all ran immediately for the door that was still locked. And the only person who had a key was a guy with a 9mm Uzi. I don't know how sometimes I made it out alive in that neighborhood. But, now looking back, all that security, the Uzi, the alarm, the bars, and, his dad was a truck driver. He wasn't around a lot. And his mom was a small, petite black lady. She was very nice. But I could kind of see now, looking back, that it was a little, it could be a little scary, especially when you live next door to the people that we live next door to. This other house that was right across the street from us was a rental. And this house was always rented out to the sketchiest people on the face of the planet. There was one guy that was lived there for a little while. He had an El Camino, and he was really proud of this El Camino. Just thought it was the greatest thing. He was out there washing it all the time and waxing it, and he just thought it was the greatest thing. And then one day, one of my friends was driving down the road. He was coming, I think he was coming to see me, but he was going too fast, and there was a lady pulling out of her driveway, and he couldn't stop in time, so he veered off to the left, ran through a chunk of our yard into the neighbor's yard, and smashed into the El Camino, okay? And he drove a 1975 Monte Carlo SS. They were both kind of nice cars, but it was like the 1970s just exploded in this front yard across the street. And come to find out, that El Camino was stolen. And the guy who was driving it also had a warrant out for his arrest for something else. So that was the kind of neighborhood we lived in. And then there was Mike Shaw. Mike Shaw and the Shaw family, they were great. He ended up coming to the same church as us. We went on mission trips together. This was the guy that I always was like proud that he was my friend because he was on the varsity football team. He ended up playing for Florida State when they won the national championship. And yes, when he was in my wedding, I told him to wear the ring. I was like, you got to wear the national championship ring. And it's got to be in the pictures, Mike. And he was 280 pounds. He was a little bit shorter than me, and he could still dunk a basketball. That's how big this guy was. He was just all muscle, and he was a really cool dude. And we got to know his family really well. Well, when I was in college, I found out through the grapevine that his dad had left his family for another woman years earlier, and I didn't know that. And this father was a father to all of us. He taught some of us how to play basketball. He was always telling us, life lessons and moral lessons, and he goes and does that, and I didn't know it. And I asked Mike, I said, why didn't you tell her? Why didn't you tell us? And he said, I just don't like talking about it. And that was literally the only time he ever mentioned it. And then there was my next door neighbor, Norman and B. And we used to call them Uncle Norman and Aunt B. That's how close we were to them. And they would let us swim in their pool every summer, and we loved it. They let the neighborhood kids come over, and then sometimes she would bake cookies and have lemonade out there for us, and they were just great people. And I remember one time, though, and they were older, they were in their 70s, and I remember one day we come home, and there's a sea of cop cars out in their front yard. And we went over there, and I didn't because I was too young, but my parents did. Come to find out, they were robbed at gunpoint in their front yard. And it was a scary, scary situation for them. And the only people right at that moment that they had that can console them, that could talk to them, that could pray for them were their neighbors. And that was us. So when I look back on that neighborhood, there was no neighborhood, there were no neighbors, no other places I've lived that have influenced me and changed me and have meant as much to me as an Arbel Drive neighborhood. But looking back, I can see that it was a mixed bag. I had a lot of friends, but the 3 bullies that I had to deal with growing up also lived on that street. You know, they say that you remember the names of your bullies better sometimes than you do your friends. I remember them. Chris Redfield, Trey Walton, and Donald Hungerford. Now, thankfully, those 3 guys lived on the other side of Arbel Drive and never came over to our side very much. In fact, we ended up banning them from our side of the neighborhood because we didn't want them walking down the street thinking they owned the place. Yeah, sometimes it's a mixed bag. I do think we were successful in being a gospel light in that neighborhood, but we also had some real missed opportunities. First of all, we didn't know all of our neighbors. I knew a lot of them. But if I think about across the other street, Townsend Boulevard, which was a very busy street, I didn't know anybody on that side of the street. And there are lots of people who I know by name and face, but I didn't know anything about them. So we didn't get to know all of our neighbors. Another thing we had a missed opportunity on was the ones that we did know, we didn't always share with them. Like my friend Mike. I didn't know his dad had left him, and I wasn't paying attention to that stuff. I was just a kid. But I kind of wish I did. I wish I was there for him a little bit better on that front. The Christian life is first and foremost about faith in God and belief in his ways. But as far as action goes, the primary action of the Christian walk is summed up in a clear and convincing way to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. And we're going to see the origins of this commandment in the Old Testament. This is a passage of Scripture that if you're a Jew growing up, an Orthodox Jew, you had to memorize this passage of Scripture. It's what everything else hinged on. In verse 4 to verse 9, it says this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. A lot of folks think, when they think of the Old Testament, they think about rules and laws, and they think about a vengeful God, a wrathful God. They think about Noah and the flood. They think about Sodom and Gomorrah, and they think that God in the Old Testament is wrathful and angry, and the God of the New Testament is about love. When the greatest commandment that the God of the Old Testament gave was to love. It wasn't anything else. It was love. Love is what we were commanded to do. What he truly wants, even above obedience, is for people to love him. And the motivation is clear. We are to love God because he first loved us. God does not require his creation to love him with no reason. That's what narcissists want. God has given us every good thing in our lives. He has shown us in every human way possible and beyond why we should love him. And he's given us the freedom to choose to love him. So notice the progression in these 6 verses. You first, the individual, you shall love the Lord your God, and you will write it on your heart. It starts with the individual. Even though as a nation, Israel had to memorize this passage growing up in a Jewish home, it was the individual's choice whether or not they were going to follow it. So it starts with you, and it has to start with you if it's going to progress from there. You have to make an individual choice to love. Then it extends to the family, expands out to the immediate family. So you're to teach them to your children. You are to bind them around their necks. You are to teach them and show them the love of God when you rise, when you lie down, when you go about your way. So it's supposed to be for your children, for your spouse, and for your family. Then it is to be a sign on your doorposts and on your gates. This is not to just be practiced at home, but it is also to be a light to your neighbors as well. So even the greatest commandment, and one that is the most intimate and devotionally personal between you and God, has a missions component to it. You are to show the love of God, the love that he has for his creation and the love you have for him to the people that live around you. Now, turn your attention to another passage. Go back a couple of books to Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 19. Just 2 books back. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. This is the second component of the greatest commandment. In verse 18, it says, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." This simple little passage has enormous implications. When you are dealing with disagreements with your neighbor, the Bible makes it clear that you are not to hold a grudge against them. You are not to argue with them. You are to love them. You are to operate out of a spirit of love. How revolutionary would that be in many neighborhoods if Christians would just rise up and love during a time of disagreement? So their dog is coming and messing in your yard. So they keep parking on your grass. So they play loud music every once in a while. So they do weird things you don't understand. Is your modus operandi to love them? Is that your knee-jerk reaction? Is to show love and compassion? I got to be honest, there are times where I did not show a lot of love and compassion to my neighbors. And that's because a lot of times they didn't show love and compassion to me either. And so it's understandable, but we're to be better than that. As Christians, we're to rise above what is normal, what is usual, because what is normal and usual is operated by our sin nature and not by God. You know, to love your neighbor is different than a lot of the philosophy and mentality that we live with today. It's not the I got's mine, so I don't have to care about you mentality. It's not the live and let live mentality either. Well, if I live my way and you live your way, and as long as we don't clash, we're okay. Is that where God stops? No, it's not where God stops. If it were, anybody could do it. But as the Christian way, we are to find ways to know our neighbors, to meet their needs, to love them as best we can. You cannot love your neighbor by leaving them alone and not knowing anything about them. You just can't. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Is this starting to sound a little familiar? Did we see this somewhere else in the Bible? This is what Jesus said was the summary of all the commandments. Turn to Matthew 22. This is going to be the last passage we turn to. We're going to camp out here for a little while. Matthew 22. He takes these 2 passages that the Jews would have been familiar enough with, and he combines them. He puts them together. And he says, all 600 some odd Old Testament commandments, all the things I taught you, all the things that you're supposed to do as the nation of Israel, can all be summed up with these 2 things right here. Matthew 22, verse 35. Got to flip over here. And he says, but when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Now, this is one of those passages that you've probably heard, if you've grown up in church, you've heard it enough times that you've become numb to it. It's like John 3:16. Everybody hears it so often that it kind of loses its meaning if you're not engaged with it. But what I want you to do as a pastor, what I want you to do this morning is to do your level best to approach this passage with a fresh mind and a fresh heart. I know you've heard it before, but more often than not, we need fresh eyes and fresh hearts to look at these passages. especially in the context of New Life Baptist Church. We have a real opportunity to be a beacon in our community, to be the beacon of the gospel in our community. But the way we're going to do that is not through great programming here on this property. It's not. That's second. That's the second step. It's part of it, but it's the second step. It's not the first step. The first step is by being a good neighbor that God has called us to be to our actual neighbors. You see, a lot of people water down God's commandment to love our neighbors by allegorizing the word neighbor. What they'll do is they'll take the word neighbor and they'll say that means anybody. And they'll quote the Good Samaritan, where Jesus talks, he's asked, who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells the story of the Samaritan. The Samaritans didn't live around the Jews. They were further south, or depending on where the Jews were living, further north. They were in between, but they weren't living next door to them. But that wasn't the point that Jesus was making. The point that Jesus was making was your neighbor can be somebody that is completely different than you, and you still have to reach them. That was his point. But when he says love your neighbor, what we should do, instead of trying to allegorize everything, we should go for the plain reading of the text. Jesus didn't allegorize the word neighbor here, so we shouldn't. We should take it literally. And it's what theologians call the sensus plenior. That's Latin. It means plain reading of the text, the plain sense of it. And the plainest, most direct sense of this passage is your actual neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, love your neighbor, treat your neighbor the way you would treat yourself. Yesterday, we got done with kids club, and I already had my sermon planned, and I already had my Bible study for tonight worked out, and yard work was done. We cleaned the house on Friday, so guess what I did? I treated myself, and I just did whatever I wanted to do for an entire afternoon, and it was great because it never happens. So I treated myself well. And what God is saying is, as well as you treat yourself on your best days, that's the way we need to treat our neighbors. That's what it means. Love your neighbor as yourself. The power and genius of the Great Commandment is that it's so simple, and yet it's so powerful when acted upon. The smartest thing that we could do collectively as a church to impact our community is to actually live out Jesus' command to love our neighbors. One of the main reasons why it is so powerful is because it is intentional. When I would do children's church back at Community, sometimes I'd ask, the children, I'd ask them this question: what does God want us to do? How does he want us to act around other people? And they'd always say something like, God wants us to love everyone. And that always sounds so great, to love everyone, right? That's our ultimate goal, right? What does that mean to love everyone? Can you love somebody who lives in Australia? Not particularly easily. Maybe you can send them some money or pray for them. But that person may not even know that you're doing that. They may not know that you exist. So really, when we say love everyone, what do we really say? What do we really mean? We really mean to love the people we know. We really mean to love the people that God has placed in front of us. If you can't start there, really the rest of it is not going to make as much sense. Love the people that God has put in front of you. And that's what that means. If we are not intentional in our love for our neighbor, we end up having a metaphorical love to our metaphorical neighbors in our metaphorical neighborhoods, and the end result is that we do actually very little to love them. So let's start with our neighbors, church. That's the easiest. Remember last week I said in the Kingdom Builders presentation, I said that we're going to do community outreach in a way that everyone in this church can do it. If we believe that evangelism is for every member of every church, then we should believe that it's for every member of every church. We should act that way, and our methods should reflect it. If all we do is do some kind of outreach in some particular way, we're going to exclude people. We're going to exclude other members that can't do that. And I really do believe that if you reach your neighbor, if you're serious about that, you can do it. You may need some help, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But I want you to think about somebody like Estelle Gunter. Those of you who knew Estelle knew that she loved her neighbors. She talked about them all the time. She prayed for them by name. And if all she could do was go out and get the mail from her mailbox and talk to people as they're passing by, walking by, that's all she could do, then she had a good day that day. 97 years of age, all kinds of health problems, still loved her neighbors. That's awesome. That's a powerful image. But you know, we have problems as Christians overcoming some obstacles to get to a point to where we're ready to love our neighbors. All right? And you can call them excuses, you can call them opportunities, whatever it is, the way you look at it, they are obstacles to overcome. First of all, we may think, well, we live in a rural area. There's not very many neighbors. When we went to Kentucky, there was hundreds of houses within walking distance of the church we were ministering with. So we had 50, 60 kids show up to our kids club. We had tons of parents to share the gospel with. You may say, well, we don't have that opportunity. Well, let me say this about a rural area. Number one, it's all relative. You go to Montana, it may be an hour before you drive to the closest grocery store or gas station. So rural is relative, right? That's number one. Number two, you picked to live here. You chose to live here. Some of y'all raised kids and even grandkids in this area. So you know this area very well. That also means you know your neighbor's mentality pretty well. And that means you are best suited to reach your neighbors. More suited than even me, and I'm trying. That's why we're moving over to the side of the county and all that. I'm trying, but you guys have a leg up on me because you grew up here. You lived here for years, some of y'all. You are best suited to reach your neighbors. That's the way you got to think about it. Furthermore, your 8 closest neighbors don't mean that they are physically close to you, just your 8 closest. My neighborhood, where we live right now in Reesville, only has 6 houses on the one street. But if I go around the corner and down a little ways, I can get to some more houses. Guess what? Those are our closest neighbors. And secondly, you may say, well, I've lived next to these people for years and I still don't know their names. It would be embarrassing for me to go up and talk to them. I don't even know them and I missed my opportunity. Well, you haven't missed your opportunity. Your opportunity is tomorrow. Your opportunity is in the future. It's in the present and the future, not in the past. And furthermore, you can always come up with a good excuse. I have all kinds of good excuses to go and meet my neighbor. You know, 4th of July is coming up in a couple of months. You can go bake a couple of cupcakes or go buy a couple of cupcakes and red, white, and blue cupcakes and just say, I just want to wish you a happy 4th of July. As silly as that sounds, that's enough of a reason to go and meet your neighbors. And you know, a little bit of humility goes a long way. And you can say to them, this is so silly. I know we've lived next door to each other for years, but I don't know your name. Would you mind telling me your name? Because chances are they don't know your name either. So it's mutual. And then you can laugh it off a little bit later, right? Third reason, this one's personal to me in one specific way. A lot of people don't want to impose on other people. And I get that. I understand that. I am nothing like that. That's why I don't have any problem going door to door and reaching a bunch of strangers and talking to strangers. Because I don't have that built in me. I don't know what it is. But I don't have that problem. The way I grew up was everybody was over at everybody else's house. My friends' parents were my parents. Okay? And my parents were my friends' parents. Does that make sense? So when I go over and it was lunchtime, they put together another sandwich and say, sit down, Nathan, you're going to eat lunch with us. If it was too late and my buddy Mike was over, they would just say, just call your mom, you're going to spend the night. It's too late to go home now. And we watch out for each other. And we, you know, and if I got in trouble with my neighbor's friends, parents, you know, if I got in trouble with them, I get in trouble at home too. And that's just the way we were. We never thought of imposing on each other. We never thought of having to clean up the house. That just wasn't us. And that's just not me personally. That's not part of my personality, which is why God had me marry Amy. Because I needed that in my life. Sometimes I went a little overboard. I'm going to tell you all a funny story, okay? I didn't include this in my notes, but this is just to let you know this is how I am, okay? So my cousin Eric, who was one of our neighborhood friends, he lived further down the road, but he was still considered a neighborhood friend. We'd always go over to his house. He had 4 brothers, so it was 5 boys, all around the same age. So it was Grand Central Station at the house every day. We go over there, and we would just hang out all day long sometimes. And one day I go over there, and I thought it'd be really funny to not knock on the door. I go over there almost every other day anyway, so what's the point? So I just opened the door without knocking, walked straight through, everybody sitting down on the couch, friends and family sitting down, and they look at me like I grew a second head. They're like, what are you doing? You just walking in, you didn't knock? I walk right through into the kitchen, I open up the door, and I see a slice of pizza, and I'm going to grab that pizza, and I'm going to stick it in my mouth without asking, just like I own the place. And then my older cousin, Brian, who was in the Marines, 6'4", big dude, grabbed me by the back of my pants and by the back of my shirt, and literally like did DJ, like Uncle Phil would do to DJ Jazzy Jeff in the Fresh Prince, and he just threw me out the front door right onto the lawn and locked me out. And you know, that's just the way it was back then, you know. And that's just the way I am. I'm crazy. I don't know. I don't have that in me. I just don't. I meet a stranger, I want to talk to him. And I'm not an outgoing person, but I get it. You don't want to impose on your neighbor. You want to call them ahead of time. Do whatever you got to do. But I will ask you this. What did Jesus do? What did he do? Did he wait till a perfect moment? Did he wait until that person asked him over? What did he do to Zacchaeus? Remember Zacchaeus? What did he say to him? He said, Zacchaeus, come out of that tree. I'm going over to your house today to have dinner. He imposed on him. And it was okay. It's okay to, you know, stretch your neighbors a little bit and go over there and just talk to them. Number 4, I'm going to go through this quickly. I can't go by myself. This is a legitimate thing for some people. Some people don't want to walk up and down those hills, and I get it. Roman could attest to this. There were times when we would go door to door walking up and down these hills, and I'll look at him and say, Roman, I ain't walking to that house. Get in the car. We're going to drive we're going to drive up that hill. We're not coming back, right? This is the way it was. And you know, you got some houses that are a quarter mile apart from each other around here. That's okay. Raise your hand if you're a kingdom builder. If you're on that team, raise your hand. Raise your hand high. Let people see you, okay? We might be, I think we're missing one. Any one of these people will go with you. Any one of these people will drive with you if you need to, and go and see your neighbors. I'll do it. I would love the opportunity to meet your neighbors with you if you need the help. So that's a legitimate one, but we're here for you on that. Another one is I'm not good at sharing my faith. I wouldn't know what to say if it ever came up. That's okay. God will give you the words to say it. And furthermore, we're not jumping to that point yet. What we're talking about is building up baby steps. Just get to know your neighbors. Get to know who they are. What's their name? You even know their name? Do you know what their kids' names are? And here's the bottom line. We can only do a few things well in this life. Let's at least do the things that matter to Jesus well. If he says it matters to him, let's do that. Let's focus on that. And we can take baby steps in our efforts. We should be taking our time. Building relationships takes time. And let me tell you, this is how the natural process of building relationships happens. Okay, they're strangers to you right now, some of them. Some of you know really well, I get that. But the ones you don't know, well, they're strangers to you. And you're going to treat them like a stranger, and they're going to treat you like a stranger. But that doesn't mean you can't be kind to strangers. That doesn't mean you can't get to know them. And you get to a point to where you build up trust, where you at least can wave at them and you know their name. Then they become an acquaintance. Some of my neighbors are like that, where I might borrow a tool from them, or they might come over and borrow a cup of sugar from me, or whatever it is. And they're at least friendly enough to where we have that trust level, but we're not quite good friends yet, okay? And then eventually that acquaintance can become your friend. It can happen. Some of y'all have your best friends from your neighborhoods just like I did. Some of y'all can see the potential in your neighbors becoming your friends. I'm not sure if you've heard the news, but I'll go ahead and say it out loud that we just inked a deal on a house. So we're going to be moving out here close to the church, within 10-minute drive of the church, and I'm very happy about it. I'm excited. So the DeFalcos will be part of the Greater Bald Hill Loop area. Woo! It's going to be good. And we're in a neighborhood with a lot of houses. It's going to feel a little bit like Arbel Drive in that sense. And Olivia's not excited about that because she's like Wesley. She doesn't want anybody around them. And that's okay too. We can all learn to live together in one big happy neighborhood family. And, we've got a lot of great things in that house that we're looking forward to. And it's an upgrade to our current house in a lot of ways. But the thing I'm most looking forward to is talking to those neighbors and getting to know them, maybe praying for them, maybe sharing my faith with them. We prayed for a lot of things about this house, but above all, we prayed that God would put us in a place where we can reach someone. We don't live there by accident. We don't live where we live by accident, and it's not because we like the floor plan or the school system, or it's because what we afford, or it's been in our family's name for many, many years. It's because that's where God placed you. We live where we live because God has put us on mission. Look, I can't make anyone reach their neighbors. Can't do it. I wouldn't want to if I could. But I do believe God's still got work left to do in our church. And we can do one of two things. We can sit with our arms folded and let everyone else do the work. But here's what happens when that happens. Because I believe God's not done with this church. God's going to bless this church. And we're still going to reach people with this church. And we're still going to be a light in this church. But the difference is if you got your arms folded and you're sitting on the sidelines and you're not praying and you're not helping the way you know how to help and the way you can help, the way God has led you to help, then the blessing of the growth that will happen will pass you by. I don't want that for anybody because I know what it's like to be on the other side, helping. It's awesome. It's great to see God, the gospel, working in someone's life and watch their life turn around. Don't you want to be a part of that? Well, if you do, I've asked Roman to go ahead and pass out these magnets. We got magnets for you that you can stick on your refrigerator. And in these magnets, you're going to see that grid that I was talking about earlier. 8 houses, and you're in the middle. Now, you're not to take that literally. We don't live in the urban environment, but you're to take the 8 households that are closest to you, and you're to write their names in. And maybe some of y'all know the 8 closest people that live to you, and you can write their names in and pray for them right then and there on the spot. But my hope and prayer is that our church, if you don't know the names of the people that live around you, please find the time in the next few weeks to go over and say hello. Shake their hand. If you're good at baking stuff, bake them something. Or you don't have to, it doesn't matter. You just go over there and say, I want to introduce myself. My name is, and that's it. And let God take it from there, because I promise you, he's going to do some amazing things with that simple conversation starter. You know? And then when you get home, you go up on your refrigerator, you can stick it on your mirror at home, in your bedroom if you want. You write their name in there. And you pray for them. That's all we're asking right now. You build that relationship up. And if we do that, church, you better be ready to receive God's blessing. You know, it's almost like you want God to work, you pray for God to work, and then when he works, you get surprise face on. You know, you get surprised. And you don't expect it. But the truth of the matter is, we need to be ready for that change. We need to expect that God is going to work in our lives and do amazing things. So be in prayer over that. And when you do meet somebody, I want to hear about it. When you shake their hand and you say, Pastor Nathan, I got to know someone. I didn't know this about them. I got to know that because I reached out to them. I'm going to put a couple of stipulations on this, all right? You ready? Number 1, if they go to this church, they don't count. For the magnet. You can pray for them every day. You know, that's great. For the magnet's sake, what we're trying to do, we're trying to reach new people. Number 2, if they happen to cross over, I know some of y'all live close enough together where you share neighbors, that's okay. You can both pray for the same person and go and reach the same person. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And the other one is that if all you can do physically is to pray for them, or if you want, I'll go with you to meet them. At least try to make some effort, okay? Let's go to Lord in prayer, and we're gonna sing, and we're gonna talk about reaching our neighbors for the next few weeks, but keep in mind that this is an act of worship to God, so it's not just about action. It's about how we orient ourselves around who God is and what he's done for us. Father in heaven, thank you for this time together, and we ask, Lord, that you will help us to know our neighbors so that we can reach them with the gospel. And Lord, we know that you're going to be there, that you're already going before us and preparing the way. You're tilling the soil so we can plant the seeds, so you can water it and watch it grow. There's still people out there that need you. If there wasn't, the times would have been fulfilled and we would have already been raptured up. So as long as we are given breath, Lord, help us to be the best witness to our neighbors we can be. In Jesus' name, amen.